Hello and welcome to this Corona Renderer tutorial on the LightMix. So what is the LightMix? Well, LightMix is an incredibly powerful way to adjust your scene lighting, both intensity and colour, once your image has rendered, or even whilst it's rendering. So how do we go about looking at that? Well, let's pop over to the LightMix tab on the top right here, and you'll see we got some settings. Now these settings were set up in the multipass, and I'll run through how to do that shortly. Let's just have a look at what they can do. Well, currently I've got a sky, a couple of lamps, and some fill lights, as well as these little fairy lights here. So I'm going to turn everything off apart from the sky and just have a look at what we can do. Oh, and the rest here is the unassigned, any other lights that have not been given a specific area in the scene. But there's nothing in that, so you'll see there's nothing currently being adjusted when I turn that off. So this scene is now entirely being lit with the sky here. So I can turn that off and it goes completely black. Now I've got a setting of 8.398 here. And I can adjust this down and you'll see the scene start to get darker. So we can go all the way down to completely black. So you see we can control it from a completely nighttime to a daytime scene. Now if we wanted to go down to a more sort of dusky evening nighttime scene, I can have that on a very low setting and start to turn on some of these other lights. So I can have the bedside lamp here and the bedside lamp here. Now we've got ourselves a more of a sort of an evening setting. But I can even start to go in and adjust some of these colours. So I can start adding a sort of a bluey tinge to this one and a crazy pinky tinge to this one. Start giving you some very unique looks incredibly quickly without having to re-render anything at all. And I can even start to add in these fairy lights back in. They look a bit white at the moment, so I'm just going to give them a more sort of warmish hue. Put these back to some more standard colours. I'll leave a little bluey tinge on this one. So there we go. So that's an incredibly quick and powerful way to change the look of your image completely. And you could save out some presets for these settings and quickly do different camera angles and even take this whole thing over into post and control the settings there. So that's how it works. So let's go and set it up and go from there. Now, as our main scene has quite a complicated hierarchy with quite a few different lights in it, I'm just going to open up this simple example scene to show how the interactive LightMix works and how you can use the automatic settings to split out your lights into different layers. So in this scene, I've got a simple corona light at the root of the hierarchy. I've got a group which contains a light which is being used as an instance here, and a light which is just a light not being instanced. So let's go up to the Corona menu and click on Multipass and see what options we have. So we click on Multipass again and click on Setup Interactive LightMix. Now here you'll see you've got the Instance Lights option, you've got Grouped Lights, and you've got Individual Lights. We've also got Add Hidden Lights, which will let you add any hidden lights you've got in your scene. And you've also got included in denoising, which we probably want to leave turned on. So we'll look at instance lights first, and you can see it's going to create us 3 different LightMix layers, and it's going to use about 170 megabytes of RAM. So we can click generate on here, and there we go. Now you've got your interactive LightMix layer at the top, which allows us to choose whether we're adding the bloom and the glare. And we've also got the 3 LightMix layers that it talked about. So let's look at each one. So first off, we have our instance. So this has taken the instance itself as well as the source object that is being instanced. So this will pull in as many instances of you have of this one in a scene. Really useful if you want to control all of the lights that you've instanced around your scene in one layer. Next up we have the other one that's in the group. So this is our other light which is in the group, which is not being instanced. So we have a separate layer for that. And lastly, we got the other light, which is in the root here. So let's delete these quickly and have a look at the other option. So grouped lights. So I'm going to click generate again. It's going to use 3 layers and another 170 of RAM. So this time we have the instance on its own. It's ignoring the fact it's not pulling in that the hero object that's being instanced. And then we got the group. And this time it's looking at the top level, null only, and not bringing the specific lights. So you'd have full control over both of those lights under one layer. And as many lights as you had in that group would be controlled on one LightMix layer. And then lastly again we got the corona light, which is in the root here. Let's delete those and have a look at the final option. Individual lights. Now this time we're going to create 4 layers. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 lights. So click generate and there you go. You've got a separate LightMix layer for every light in your scene. Now if you had a big scene like we've got the main scene we're looking at, this would soon get very messy and hard to control, which is why when setting up your scene it's so very important to take your time in naming your lights and grouping things properly and just generally being neat in the way that you're working. And this helps so much when it comes to the LightMix. So that about wraps up for this part and how that works. Let's jump back over to our main scene and have a look at it there. Now that we're back in our main scene, we're going to set up our LightMix layers for this, and then we're going to jump over to the VFB and have a look at the renders. Let's go up to the Corona menu and can multipass, and then click on the multipass. I'm going to set up interactive LightMix. I'm going to use grouped lights like we went through before. And it's going to create me 7 layers using 190 mega RAM. And you can see if we did choose individual lights now, we'd get 29 layers, which is just too much to be dealing with realistically, especially if you're going to start rendering that out for compositing. So let's click generate. And we can see all our different layers that have been created. And we can see the biggest one here is the fairy lights, because that has a lot of different lights in it. And then we can look at the menu here. We can see it's taken the top null again, and all these instances are inside it. Right, so let's go up to our VFB, and we're going to look at the IR first. So I'm going to say start IR and see what happens. So you can see that as soon as IR kicks in, we get all of these lights like we had before come up in our list here. So then we can start to go through and turn lights on or off, turn the sky off, turn the fill light off, and then we can start to go through and sort of add some colours into our lights and start changing the scene as we want, all whilst IR is running. So, which is great. So now let's click stop on there, and we're going to do a full render now. We click on render, and now that's kicked in. We can see that all of our settings that we just set up in IR have carried across, and we got the exact same look. And we can continue to tweak this as the full render is cleaning up our image, as the passes are going through. So we got full control. So I can start to change the bedside lamp here, make that a bit brighter, add a bit more warmth into it, etc, etc. And this is just a really powerful way of changing our image and working on the image whilst we're waiting for that render to go through. Now one thing to bear in mind is that if we've got a light here, like this blue lamp here, that is actually coloured from in the actual scene. It's set up on the light itself to be blue, not in our list over here. If we were to try and say set this to a red, what we're actually going to see is that the colour doesn't match what we would expect. This is due to how the filtering works, and the colour here is being added on top of the blue colour that we had before. So we can see that even further if I was to change this other lamp to the same red, and that's more what we would expect. So let's go up the intensity a little bit so we can see it a bit clearer. There we go. So you can see the complete difference between the two based on the fact that this one over here had the blue colour in it to start with. So the best thing to do if you want the ultimate flexibility over your colour settings is to set all your lights to white. And that will give you the most control and allow you to tweak and set the colours to whatever you want in here. So the other thing to bear in mind is that when you're setting the intensities of your colours here, it is best not to go too high, really. You can increase them quite drastically, but the further you go, the more noise that you're likely to introduce into the scene. Now, of course, denoising may help with this, but we can start to see just some little fireflies and brighter pixels starting to show up here, and the higher I go, the more visible they become, and you can start to see over here, over the window area as well, and down here. So denoising may help with this, but it is generally recommended not to go too high on these intensities. Just going to bring that back down. So the other thing that we can do, which can be useful if you wanted to isolate a light just quickly and see where noise is being introduced in your scene, is to come up to the Render Element tab and just click through and have a look at what each of your LightMix layers are giving to the render straight off. So these will all be the settings that these items have in the actual scene. They won't be taking any of these settings because that is everything that we do on the interactive LightMix layer here. So we can come down to the China ball. You can see there's actually quite a lot of noise coming into this scene from this light specifically. A lot more than, say, what we're seeing from the sky here. And we can just come through and look at all the different settings. So nothing on the ceiling light there, and the fairy lights here. So yeah, mostly that's pretty clean, but we can see there's some noise over here and a few little areas. So it is good to try and pinpoint where that noise is coming from. So that about wraps it up for this part of the tutorial. But there is another way that we can set up LightMix, and that is to do it completely manually instead of using the preset options when we click through to set up these. So let's jump back over to the multipass and have a look at how to do that. Okay, so we're going to come up to our Corona menu, multipass, and we got the settings that we had previously. So let's delete all these different layers. And then we're going to come over here into this box and right click, and I'm going to add ourselves a light mix, which is the standard settings here. And we're also going to add ourselves the light select. Now you could also have come to the menu on the left here and dragged it across. So then on this light select, I only want the fairy lights this time. So I'm going to grab the fairy lights from here in our hierarchy and drop them into this box. I'm also going to click include children, so that everything in this group is taken as well. And lastly, I'm just going to rename this to Fairy Lights. So with that in mind, let's come up to our VFB and do a new IR. Now that the IR's kicked in, we can see that we've got the two options here. We've got the fairy lights that we set up, and we've got the rest, which is all the other lights in the scene, which are not being controlled by anything that we've specifically set up. So I can turn every other light off in the scene apart from the fairy lights which we added to that pass. And then I can control the brightness of these and of course add a little bit of colour into the scene. And it really is as easy as that, and we can create as many different layers as we want and assign whatever we want to those layers. Now one of the other useful things that you can do with LightMix is to take this render over into the Corona image editor using the CXR, which is the Corona version of an EXR. Now that allows you to edit this image using all the settings you have in the VFB without having to say open up your 3D app or re-render the file. So it's just a really useful way to do that. So we're going to do that by going up to save here and coming to save CXR. And then we're going to go save over this fairy lights right here. We're going to say yes. And I'm going to come over to the Corona EXR here. And I'm going to discard what I've got at the moment and open up this CXR. Now then, as you get here, it's going to look quite different to what we had in the VFB. That's because we had our LightMix enabled in the VFB, and when you open it up here, we're actually looking at the beauty which has been denoised here. So we can change the render element over to our LightMix and it will look as we expected. Or if we left it as the beauty and came over our LightMix here and edited a setting, it will then automatically change over to the LightMix. And once we're here, we've got all the same options that you're used to. We can lower the intensity of this, or brighten it up, and we can change the colors and do all these sorts of things that we are used to doing. We can do that as well as having access to the tone mapping, LUTs, bloom and glare, sharpening, and denoising. So it really is very useful, this image editor, for editing your image once it has been rendered. So the other thing we can do here is to say save out our configuration, save out this look. Because if we had done some work here and we liked the look of our image, we're happy with how the lights now looked, but say we had to move a 3D object. Well, we can save out the configuration file. I'm just going to save here. So very lights config. Now we've got these pink lights, and we can pop back over into Cinema 4D, and I can then load this config file back in, and there we go. We've now got the settings that we used in the Corona image editor in Cinema 4D, and these work vice versa. So if you did some changes here, you can then take that over to the image editor there. So if you were rendering lots of different images from lots of different camera angles, this would be a really quick way to get the same look pushed onto all of those different images. So that about wraps it up for this tutorial on the LightMix. Thank you ever so much for watching, and please do go and check out the other videos on our YouTube channel. That's bye for now.